I'll take you live to the Ghana Academy of Art and Sciences, where the 2025 Occasional Lecture with the theme Iniquities of Inequity in Our Santa Claus Democracy. And the speaker for today, Mr. Yao Nsakwa, former Executive Vice President, Global Markets, Unilever, and as well Chairperson, Emerita Professor Techiwa Menu, speaking, FGA, Vice President Art Section at GAAS.
The cultural and multilateral approaches in a world largely moving in the other direction. He's married with 2 sons, and this evening he's accompanied by his lovely wife, Liz, to this lecture. Mr. Nsakwa, this is your audience.
Thank you very much for the generous introduction. Chairperson, distinguished fellows and members of the Academy. I wanted to say friends, but there are also friends of my late parents here, so I don't want to club them all. So distinguished friends of my late parents, I want to acknowledge one of them. I used to go and beg for bread in his house. I was just telling him. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, students, everybody who is here. If I have left out anybody, if anybody is not in any of the categories I've mentioned, you can put up your hand and I'm willing to acknowledge that. It is with a degree of trepidation that I accepted the invitation to address you. Growing up in Legon as a campus kid, we thought of this academy as a place where much older people gathered. It was not clear to us what for. They seemed to be mysterious people whose favorite pastime was to engage in arcane and esoteric debates, which for some strange reason seemed to annoy military dictators. That view was concretized when an academy lecture delivered by an eminent historian led to infuriated roars of an impending inferno by a very senior soldier. To be invited here then could mean I have become a somewhat old man, up to some mischief that may annoy the powerful. Yet, I am a man of peace, hopefully of ideas. It is my fervent wish that what I say this evening will occasion no dire consequences. It is important that what is now a very polarized society, Ghana, that is, rebuilds a capability to think and act together on matters that affect us all. There are many aspects of our existence in which we can do better. The cord of misery that binds our people in a tight noose transcends partisan polarities, even if we do not always seem to realize this. A Latin American theologian once said, not without a sardonic flavor, that when I feed the poor, they call me holy. But when I ask why there are so many poor people, I'm called a communist or pessimist. Too radical, too controversial. Scholars tend to talk about the gown going to town. When you ask a man of modest academic station like me to speak on an academy platform, it appears that the reverse happens. The town comes to the gown. You will see why soon, for this speech will be delivered principally in English, but not exclusively so. We must remember and honor Ngugi wa Thiong'o for his lifelong campaign for indigenous languages. Thanks for the invitation to speak here. I'll go into my introduction. The world is going through seismic changes in geopolitical terms. A question that ought to be on each of our minds in all this is, where will Africa emerge? Will Africa's role continue to be that of a marginalized periphery in the international finance system? Will Africa be relegated to the status of a perennial underachiever, perpetually going around the world with a cup in hand in search of aid, to pursue what Samir Amin and Andre Gunda Frank called lumpen development, the modernization of poverty? A present which for the majority of our compatriots is a reality of indignity. We experience too much poverty, harbor too many conflicts, and battle too many afflictions like undernutrition, mass illiteracy, and disease. It is in search of solutions to such problems that many Africans battled stridently against civilian and military dictatorships over the 80s and 90s in an effort to achieve democratic governance. Where did it land us? True democracy or something else? It is now more than 3 decades since Ghana embarked on the journey we describe as the Fourth Republic. Since 1992, we have organized 9 elections. The Fourth Republic of Ghana has survived longer than any of its predecessors. That, however bleak we may think things are, is reasonable grounds for some celebration, but only some. We ushered in the Fourth Republic after more than a decade of military rule with heightened hopes. Democracy was to restore basic freedoms, and freedom mattered because it would deliver significantly improved livelihoods. This is not just conjecture. Any impartial reviewer of the directive principles of state policy that were etched into our Constitution cannot but reach the conclusion that we expected to see manifest progress and development in the era of the Fourth Republic. While it will be considerably unfair to argue that there has been no progress whatsoever, it is reasonable to say that our expectations are nowhere near fully met, for many of us at least. The economic dividend, Madam Chair, is yet to come. Indeed, barely 3 weeks ago, on May 28, 2025, the Ghana Statistical Services stated in an important governance report, quote, over 70% of Ghanaians feel that the current political system provides little or no space for them to influence decision-making, unquote, 70% of Ghanaians. This is a worrying indictment of our claims to democracy. While a small number, mainly in circles that benefit from political patronage, have done very well, too many of our compatriots continue to languish in misery, poverty, and indignity. This situation we label as the iniquities of inequity. Ghana in this lecture is merely a case study for a condition or set of conditions that can be found in many parts of the African continent. Often, these patterns of under-delivery are explained away by personalizing the reviews. Which specific individual is evil becomes the preoccupation of the electorate when the season of elections approach. Yet, there must be systemic issues that underlie all patterns of behavior that become repetitive. That must be true for even misgovernance and corruption. These systemic issues need to be better understood by excavating their root causes. If we continue to remain content with superficial conjecture based on gossip and superstition masquerading as intellectual analysis, we are destined for the road on which the eminent political philosopher Isaiah Berlin famously remarked that, quote, freedom for the wolves has often meant death to the sheep, unquote. Who are the wolves in a Santa Claus democracy? The political elites and their associates? And who then are the hapless sheep? Claude Eke, the redoubtable political economist, in his last book, published posthumously, wrote about post-colonial African countries, quote, one is the country of the elite, usually less than 10% of the population. It is for all practical purposes another country, organically linked and oriented to the highly industrialized societies which it resembles. Like them, it enjoys a comparatively high real income, very high living standards, and scores very well on social indicators such as life expectancy, infant mortality rates, nutritional level, literacy, and educational standards. On such indicators, the score of the African elite would be far higher than the average for the highly industrialized countries, which means literacy rates verging on 100%, life expectancy at about 76, and incomes in excess of $16,000 per annum, and access to health, water, and electricity. Earlier in the same book, Claude Eke had charged with characteristic scholarly vigor. Quote, we usually think of the crisis of underdevelopment in Africa as an economic crisis, but it is in fact primarily a political crisis. To be sure, It has an economic side which is serious, but this could be incidental. It would appear that the problem is not so much that the development project has failed, as that it never started in the first place. It never started because the political environment has been inclement, unquote. I dedicate this speech, whatever they would have thought about it, to Claude Eke and 4 of his professorial comrades at Codesria, now gone where all creation is headed eventually. Samir Amin, Archie Mafeje, Thandika Mkandawire, and Paula Hontonji. The historical task of this generation of Africans is, it seems to me, to liberate the productive forces in order to significantly improve the livelihoods of the broad masses of our compatriots. Chinua Achebe was right when he wrote, quote, "God loves the ordinary people. If it were not so, he would not have made so many of them," unquote. Nothing that we do on this continent, be that education, development discourse, ideology, democracy, religion, sports, or whatever else, not even the rising sun, matters in the long run if it does not significantly dent poverty and eliminate extreme poverty. Ultimately, it must lead to greater prosperity for ordinary people so that they too share in human dignity in a real way. Extreme poverty is indignity. There is no other way to describe a lack of basic sanitation, decent housing, education, security, good nutrition, and many such things. Let us be clear from the onset. Any 34 million people who only manage to create a GDP per annum of circa 75 billion will not experience mass prosperity. That society will be submerged in the trenchant problems of mass poverty. In the end, that is the Ghanaian story. Therefore, we must grow inclusively out of this misery. Even in an era when we tout a 24-hour economy as an ambition, however that is defined, a lecture like this must fit in a finite time. Therefore, my proposal is to define what is meant by Santa Claus democracy and then cover only 5 sub-themes of concern, knowing many other areas exist around which we must build consensus centered on big ideas about how we can escape misery. These 5 chosen areas will be: 1, that people-based development and democracy, and therefore inclusive growth, can only be shaped, driven, and sustained by cross-sectoral approaches, not by private sector domination of the governance process. Keep in mind that I'm a private sector veteran of 30 years. At this stage of development, it is simply not tenable, in my considered view, to leave the engine of growth in the hands of the private sector alone. 2, perspectives on the roles educated elites, professionals, and academics can or should play to significantly accelerate our march forward from poverty into prosperity. 3, perspectives on the role of traditional leaders. 4, some remarks on political parties. 5, comments on the media environment. If we survive till then, that will be it, no more. And hopefully you would still be convinced that this has been an exercise in peace by a man of peace. Mass misery and the Santa Claus democracy. When a system of governance, any system at any level for that matter, degenerates de facto and principally into a high-cost, over-monetized, cyclical, and periodic series of elections, when things begin to resemble what Wole Soyinka famously and felicitously described as a public auction for the highest bidder, when, despite protests to the contrary by its protagonists, the perception of politics in the eyes of many ordinary people is that it is a ladder to illegitimate riches for a chosen few, a Santa Claus democracy emerges. The people come to only matter, not as citizens who are the purpose of the democratic project, but as sterile, dispensable ballots. That is not true democracy. In prescribed cycles, in our case of 4 years, the citizens are bribed, coaxed, bought, and swayed by gift-bearing politicians. Those who cast the ballots, the people themselves, no longer matter, as Joseph Stalin intoned. It is only those who count the ballots that do. The political class then does democracy to the people, not with the people. In between the 4 years, elected politicians are expected to show up at funerals, at naming ceremonies, at weddings, at other social events of this kind, bearing gifts like Santa Claus on their modest declared salaries. How is this possible? Yet the politicians know that not to show up is a case of electoral death. A people now accustomed to a politics that delivers nothing to them extract their pound of flesh this way, and a transactional machine is born. It is short-term, driven by expediency, and, ominously, it can hardly yield long-term thinking around big ideas of development. This is the road to barbarism, where accumulation and economic growth only happen by dispossession, not by solidarity of all for all. The over-monetization of any governance arrangement weakens its immune system, whatever it is called: democracy, dictatorship, socialism, capitalism, or sheer anarchy. Our pervasive misery is not accidental. It should be expected. 32 years into the project that is the Fourth Republic, some of the prevailing conditions, stepping away from the manic fixation with financial indicators by neoliberals, are as follows. According to official records, 6.9 million of our compatriots, 20% of the population, live in extreme poverty. The comparable numbers in Morocco and China are 4% and 0% respectively. We have a housing deficit of circa 2 million units. Open defecation rates linger stubbornly at about 18%, where Rwanda has now almost eliminated this blight on the human condition. Our protein intake is a whopping 30% less than the average of OECD countries. 61.3 grams per day versus 80 grams per day in the OECD countries. As this has happened, we have taken to church. Church attendance at least once per annum in Ghana in the last 25 years, that is, 2000 to 2025, has moved from 60% of the population to 72%, according to one estimate. We may not have too much abinchi, but we certainly have plenty, hallelujah. The younger ones, if you want to understand where those expressions are, speak to the older people who knew the pioneer students of the Legon Hall in the 1950s. They will tell you about the protest that was called abinchi before hallelujah. Succeeding generations now put hallelujah before abinchi. The late scholar of management, Sumantra Ghoshal, popularized the idea of the smell of the place in management literature. Sumantra Ghoshal used the metaphor, the smell of the place, to describe the organizational environment or culture that influences people's behavior and attitudes. He argued that the context created by leaders significantly impacts how people feel, act, and form. The smell of a Santa Claus democracy, ladies and gentlemen, is a pungent, bothersome smell. It reminds one of a decaying democracy, one in which the people lose agency. Let us proceed to honestly discuss some of the reasons why. It was the great Polan Ontonji, note that he was a scholar from the humanities, who wrote powerfully that, quote, "Science is generated by discussion and thrives on it. If we want science in Africa, we must create in the continent a human environment in which and by which the most diverse problems can be freely debated." Unquote. I suspect that the Academy is one good forum for just that. People-based development requires a competent state, is my next sub-theme. One area where there's insufficient diversity in thinking and practice within the political class is that they largely uphold the view that the state must be beaten into retreat. Privatization is presented as a panacea, the state or government as a liability. If this had the enduring validity of reasoning it is presented with, we should be very well off in Ghana. The state, or the public sector, if you prefer that expression, must play a pivotal role in the development project. Mariana Mazzucato, a distinguished professor of economics and innovation, is, in my view, right when she says, quote, "The ambition of government should be to set off catalytic reactions across society, helping steer change towards meeting society's challenges, offering clear rewards for businesses willing to help make it happen, and stamping up the high-risk early investments that businesses tend to shy away from," unquote. The private sector is important, critical, even indispensable to wealth creation. It can be a source of real innovation and enterprise that significantly propels the march forward of society. The market, when properly governed, can be an extremely useful tool. But it must be properly and transparently governed if it is to thrive for the welfare of all. It must be designed by policy and transparent practices to ensure fair distribution of the wealth it creates. Fair distribution is ensured not just through progressive taxation, but also what the Commonwealth is invested in. There's always a choice to be made between, for example, building a health system that works for all, or building an elite health facility for only parliamentarians. We can develop processes that make national health insurance functional for all, or default to a system that makes the process easier for only the political elites to receive medical treatment abroad. The principle should be clear by now. Stable societies focus on improving the livelihoods of all. Santa Claus democracies deliver for only a predatory and parasitic elite. The inputs used by the private sector in a country like ours are often the produce from the back-breaking work of peasants. Our demographic reality today is such that the majority of citizens are peasants. Our development policies cannot miss this and thrive. To lift people from poverty means that we must have thinking and then policies which create wealth in ways that ensures it has society-wide impacts. Not everyone is going to be a billionaire, but we can not also have multidimensional poverty at 41% in Ghana and claim to be thriving because fiscal consolidation, GDP growth, whatever. It is necessary at this stage to reflect on some recent history, relatively recent. One report on privatization made telling observations, quote, by the 1980s, state enterprises were suffering along with most businesses in Ghana, but they were also held to blame for the economy's general condition. Under pressure from the World Bank, and in accordance with the principles of the SAP ERP, in 1984, the government began to sell state enterprises to private investors, and it initiated the State-Owned Enterprise Reform Program in 1988. I'd like you to listen carefully now. In 1984, there were 235 state enterprises in Ghana. On December 23rd, 1997, just 13 years after, the Ghana government announced that the former state enterprises, that 110 former state enterprises had been divested as part of the economic restructuring policy, unquote. What have been the impacts? Why are we not a thriving country today if indeed privatization cures all ills? Where are the empirical reviews and lessons drawn from previous experiences? How come so many of the businesses that were to be brought back to life from the valley of dry bones of state ownership have their mortal remains smoldering in a consuming fire of hubris today in the private sector? Did we properly diagnose the real problems? Yet, the neoliberal megaphones are back again in full force, promising with no offered cogent analysis that is transparently made available to citizens that once we privatize something, it will thrive. Faced with the incompetence of the state where others focus on rehabilitating state competence, we cut and run. The default mode becomes to blindly privatize everything. Privatization is not a bad thing, where the business cases and the econometric models for the long term are properly vetted and validated by people with the competence to do so on a multi-stakeholder basis for the long-term health of society. In such cases, definitely privatization should be pursued. But privatization that is done principally as a matter of blind ideological faith usually ends up being laced with crony capitalism. If the state is good for nothing, how then can it be left with the responsibility of running the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, the security services, and more? The business of government may indeed just be government, as some say. But what is the purpose of government? Centuries ago, the philosopher Aristotle ventured the answer that the purpose of government must be to seek the supreme good of society and the welfare of citizens. Without tremendous transparency into all aspects of such privatization deals, let us make no mistake about this. It will lead to state capture by oligarchs and cronies of the powerful. The allocation criteria will remain dense and opaque, and the transactions themselves come to bear the pungent odors of rentier capitalism. We say glibly that the private sector is the engine of growth. That is an ahistorical position. Evidence abounds that competent states and governments drive high-quality development everywhere development happens. Private sector efforts yield the best returns to society when governance is competent. The private sector may be the driver of the engine of growth, but what vehicle does it drive? And how is the destination chosen? A journey to the moon cannot be done by car. Before we get lost in tantrums about who will drive the vehicle, can we agree on where we want to go? That will determine whether we need a driver, a pilot, or an astronaut. Not so? The private sector thrives in the context of a competent state. A competent state understands that knowledge and innovation are the primary productive forces. Therefore, its investment choices reflect this. We see wherever people have made organic progress in moving large numbers from poverty towards prosperity, that public universities and research institutions have pride of place. The professoriate is very highly regarded and works to advance the conditions of society. Education in general is given a place of high regard, and the population is incentivized to take interest in gaining knowledge through all formats of learning possible. A public sector that gets infected by extreme partisanship is a recipe for social disaster. Yet the trends point in that direction for us. We who once managed continuity in senior civil service positions, even through coup regimes, now change almost everyone in civilian transitions. CEOs of SOE, service commanders, high commissioners, boards, now even handlers of public toilets and markets. If trends continue as they are, we may someday ominously enter an era of every new president appointing a new chief justice, new government statistician, new auditor general, new electoral commissioner, and God save us, new president of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. Disruptive discontinuity will then abound. The center will not hold. The Santa Claus democracy rages on. The pressures of this disfigured political reality will confer divine rights on the presidency and kill independence in the public sector. Our democratic experiment lacks a competent state. Without that, we cannot enforce even good laws. Consequently, there will neither be order nor security in society. What kind of private sector can we then have? The major fault lines running through our chaotic administration of land, our creaking infrastructural base, the corroded administration of justice in our country that results in poor perceptions of the effectiveness of the judiciary and of the police, the challenges in public revenue management, the endless lamentations about official corruption and more. These cannot be resolved without a competent state. That ought to be clear. Equally, there are some elements of shaping of markets through deliberate policy choices, such as what areas of knowledge and innovation we will prioritize, that only the state can possibly have the resources to pursue. The emergence of big breakthroughs like the electric vehicle or the internet or artificial intelligence or nanotechnology, whether in America, Europe, or China, reflects major policy choices and approaches by governments, even if not always acknowledged. They are not outcomes of just random actions of a market. That would be a naive interpretation of political economy. We must rehabilitate our state to make it a humane state, an intelligent state, and an innovative state. It must serve the people, not the other way around. Government should operate as a meritocracy and enforce law and order to achieve social discipline. I mean, no doubt, this will not be easy, but it must be done if we are serious about development, and we should be. There are examples of constitutions in the world, including here in Africa, where public sector commissions, staffed with some of the most competent and independent-minded people available, are given real independence and autonomy. They appoint heads of state-owned enterprises, for example, in appointment processes that are constitutionally designed to give such appointees significant insulation from political manipulation. In some jurisdictions, even judges of the superior courts are interviewed before the public in transparent processes that a president has nothing to do with. Assuming good performance, they are given security of tenure. Powers of dismissal lie elsewhere, not with the president. And this can only be done through processes transparently spelled out in the Constitution. I often say, Professor Willie Mutunga, there's no way he would have survived in Kenya if we had our kind of system. The The same is true for positions like electoral commissioner, government statistician, God knows what else. There is no reason on earth why an evolved constitution of Ghana should not consider such institutional arrangements designed to make government, central and local, much more accountable to the people. Governments must also derive consensus among the people to build long-term development plans which keep consistency in the process. No people on earth throughout history have succeeded in reaching prosperity by only planning in 4-year cycles. Whatever we claim de jure, de facto, we plan in 2 narrow time horizons. Therefore, we always avoid big ideas and tough decisions like land reforms. Finally, under this sub-theme, we must reform political campaign financing. Today, no one really knows how much a candidate spends. No one knows where the money is sourced from. No one seems bound by any enforced laws to make all of this transparent. This opacity is the source of all evil in a Santa Claus democracy. For it becomes the surest corridor to money laundering and political patronage. It is no longer a controversial point, but in a Santa Claus democracy, we all just pretend not to know. About the deliberate cultivation of a garden of true democracy, we in Ghana and much of Africa seem to adopt the approach popularized by the signature tune of the Osofudazi show of yesteryear, composed by Osibisa. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going. We know we will. Where others script their constitutions and make institutional arrangements to build a political culture that makes them effective, we just go with the flow. We try to sing the hymns of democracy without any intentional coordination. After all, we are like Densifo, and Densifo can sing without hymn book. The role of highly educated people. To achieve revolutionary change in society, intellectuals must stay engaged. The Chinese leaders, intellectuals themselves, are taught that, quote, the intellectuals can only play their role when they integrate themselves with the workers and peasants, unquote. In the heady days of military rule, especially when the Unigov project was at its zenith, the professionals and academics stood up, and I see many people here who I know participated, but they don't like to be called out in these circumstances, so I will not. There are many examples, but it is reasonable to expect that this group remembers the UTAG of that era and the many valiant efforts that were made then to open democratic space in Ghana. There were many others from the other profession, students, etc., engaged in their civic duties to open space. This academy was not left out. In the end, it is true that whatever system of government only delivers mass poverty and misery will collapse. There is no way to engineer a system where extreme and egregious inequality becomes acceptable. It will always breed a firestorm in society. Peace, harmony, justice, and true freedom in their most capacious and accommodative senses will elude such societies. Writing in his influential book, Development as Freedom, Amartya Kumar Sen, the Indian super scholar and Nobel laureate, remarked, quote, development requires the removal of major sources of unfreedom, poverty as well as tyranny, poor economic opportunities as well as systematic social deprivation, neglect of public facilities as well as intolerance or overactivity of repressive states, unquote. We are living in an age where the organized prevail. It must be the age of solidarity, collaboration, networks, partnerships, alliances, and coalitions. A world characterized by rapidly changing technology and endemic 24/7 connectivity for people like us requires this. About that, there can be no ambiguity. Only the organized, only the motivated, only the diligent will have a chance. And that is true also for the highly educated. All peoples that have made remarkable progress in this world prioritize knowledge acquisition and deployment, and their policy choices reflected this. Deng Xiaoping would say energetically and repeatedly in China, quote, we should try every way to expand education, even if it means slowing down in other fields. We must try to increase the material benefits of the few top intellectuals. If we arouse their enthusiasm and show them more respect, they will make more contributions, unquote. While the educated middle class is usually everywhere to be found in all levels of government, that does not seem to translate completely to an appreciation of knowledge as a productive force by governing elites and the political class more generally. This is a characteristic not of any particular government party or president. It is the destination of anomie that all Santa Claus democracies eventually arrive at. Mammon rules. Independent thought becomes frightening to power and the powerful as it excavates embarrassing truths that they would rather submerge. If even revolutionary intellectuals stay disorganized in the face of this, the gangrene of societal decay spreads everywhere, till they become what Professor Steve Okecha, my Nigerian friend and mentor, chillingly described as, quote, my generation of home-based academics, a wasted generation capable of doing world-class research, who bowed to the forces of patriotism only to be denied midway in their career, the luster and loftiness of the ivory tower by a nation without vision, unquote. In this country, there was a time when Kwame Nkrumah scheduled regular meetings with his academy, I have been told. Whatever became of him later, he, for several years, knew how to use this institution as his extended brain. That president understood the academy was a community of true patriots, not an orbit of moonshine compradors championing interests other than those that matter to our compatriots. The latter situation, very regrettably, is the fate of some so-called think tanks today, though not all. Civil society, as the voice of the people, has a great role to play in the development of society, but its potential to be contaminated by interests that are not aligned with the collective progress of a society must not be dismissed. We must therefore always seek to, as it were, institutionally separate the sheep from the goats. While the right policy choices are required, scholars, professionals, and their ilk must accept the responsibility to stay engaged and relevant to their society. That engagement must translate into real impacts for society. This is not to take the path of bores who say that scholarly and intellectual execution are dispensable endeavors. Far from that. But we should also not at this stage of development prioritize esoterica. A poor country must make choices about what to spend its resources to think deeply about. That, it seems to me, cannot be the determination of the gender of angels, for example. Our public universities have had a long history of deep connections with the ordinary people and rural folk, with the workers and peasants, whose sweat and toil produce the wealth of our country. But if we are to be honest, the assault on the public university system in Africa by neoliberal reformers in the 80s and 90s left behind traumas and scars of anti-intellectualism from which we have not completely recovered. Commenting about this, the ever-outspoken Mahmoud Mamdani pulled no punches. Quote, development and market represented two very different and opposed relationships between supply and demand. The point of a development-oriented university was to produce skills adequate to correcting the distortions of a colonial economy. In contrast, a market-driven university tended to slot into and reproduce these distortions. From a developmentalist perspective, market orientation tended to reproduce uncritically the distortions of the market, especially those historically created by the colonial experience, unquote. We can rest the point here. The political class has a responsibility, if it is serious about promoting the welfare of all society, to make policy choices that promote learning and thinking. Originally about society, to find solutions that improve livelihoods. But so do scholars themselves, who must be assertive about championing a culture of continuous learning in wider society. Mark Twain was on to something when he said 2 important days in a person's life are the day he was born and the day he discovers why he was born. Our mighty warriors of the past used to say, Odisha Nkwa. Intellectuals must play their role for themselves and the people. Standards of academic and professional excellence must be upheld with rigor and determination in institutional and organizationally disciplined ways. Backdoor routes to the top of the pyramid should be closed, firmly shut. The media inflation of titles for mediocre achievement that has become rife in our society. All manner of charlatans posing as professors, doctorates, some given to marabouts, shamans, charlatan prophets, and so on, for unmeritorious metaphysical activities and used like properly earned awards, and all manner of prostitution of the reward system for genuine achievement must be stridently and institutionally discouraged. These are not just elite concerns. They are important for building a mindset that values meritocracy. Above everything else, The intellectuals must build courage. No constitutional arrangement on earth can give freedom to a people who are not willing to fight for it, to cherish it, and to organize to achieve it. That much we can agree on. It can only be my wish that whatever else is done in our lifetime, this dear country of ours will succeed in using its collective brain power to eliminate completely and irreversibly the primitive blight that is open defecation. Perspectives on traditional leaders. I always pause and look whether there are some traditional leaders before I start. And I know that there's a friend of one very powerful one who is here, so I'll be careful and not look in her direction as I speak. In modern times, societies speak about cultures of science and technology. We discuss cultures of productivity. There are many discussions about cultures of teaching and learning. We speak about cultures of sanitation and well-being. There are even cultures of innovation, generation, diffusion, and assimilation. And there are many more examples of how culture expresses itself and forms. Culture, just like mindset, is a consequence of deliberate historical choices by society for society. It is not an outcome of predetermined genetics, fixed, unmovable, deterministic, and stuck in time. Serious leaders trigger culture change all the time. State policy, the enforcement of laws, how we educate ourselves, how well we manage the social relations around the means of production. All these determine culture. Poverty can breed a kind of culture, prosperity too. When societies become more prosperous, consumer goods experts have tons of evidence to show that even consumption patterns change. Not just for humans, but also, it seems to me, for ancestors and deities. Yesterday's deity that accepted the cheapest and most unsophisticated brew of our local gin, Akpeteshi, may today crave the most expensive whiskey. If even the gods can change their tastes and appetites and general preferences, why must mere mortals stay stuck in ossified traditions and rituals? Some chiefs now dance to Afro beats while being carried on palanquins. Soon it may be Amapiano. When the much abused expression chiefs are the custodians of our culture is held around, with the unexamined conviction of fundamentalist disciples, what precisely is meant by that? Which culture? It is a point to reflect on deeply as a society. At the onset, it is important to state that the possibility and potential for chiefs to play an instrumental, vital, critical, and important role in national development is not being disputed. This distortion is always waiting around the corner for those of us who repeatedly and stridently campaign for radical reforms to be made to the institution. Radical reforms, relevant modernization, systemic improvements, when calls for these are made in the context of chieftaincy, it is not a veiled effort to give momentum to abolitionists. We see and respect the positive roles chiefs can play. Yet, it is also obvious that not all is well with the institution. However hard we try to discuss this, alas, we are the people who say, Dayanumo, Osofujiwahu, Dayanum. Only in 2024, the immediate past minister for chieftaincy remarked, quote, listen carefully, chieftaincy claims are matters of concern to all of us because it is on record that 70% of our national security budget goes into settling chieftaincy disputes across the country, unquote. So what is this culture they're championing? The culture of dispute? What exactly? We have to talk about it. It is certainly time to pry open this institution for critical examination and review in a genuine effort to improve chieftaincy. Hopefully, the chiefs themselves are concerned enough to lead the conversation in humility and with respect, so we too can participate with respect. Role clarity is important to establish in many organizational contexts. But Santa Claus democracies blur boundaries till there is conceptual chaos. For example, people go to charlatan mystic men when hospital fees are such that they cannot afford to pay. Parliamentarians in Ghana, to give another example, seem to many people to be the ultimate Santa Claus. Where local government has failed, the central government has failed, the chief has failed, people ask their parliamentarian to step in. Stranded, the MPs fight like their lives depend on it, for appointments to boards, to cabinet, to anything that can enable extra sources of funds to come their way. When all that fails, other methods must be explored, some of which, if itemized here, will result in me and the Academy being hauled to the hallowed precincts of Parliament for contempt. Contempt of what, though? We do not know. Chiefs face the same dilemma. Where the state fails, people turn to them and they cry out in helpless paralysis that our taxes are paid to state actors, not to chiefs. There's a sense in which we must feel some sympathy for this situation. For example, rightly so, people would like to see chiefs much more actively involved in fighting what it seems to me is the most egregious blight that faces the people of Ghana today. Illegal mining, Galamsey, I've just read the Academy statement, which I wholeheartedly, 150% agree with. With the state under successive governments having failed to deal decisively with what is an existential threat to the very survival of our ecology, it is understandable that such expectations exist. After all, in a previous era, we even turned to mysticism to try to stabilize the cedi, our dear currency. Some chiefs love the pomp and prestige of being a pseudo-state. It grants a sense of authority, importance, and power. But to those who want power, there's a rational expectation of commensurate responsibility from citizens. It was harrowing to hear people frustrated, for example, that the current Minister of Interior had asked chiefs not to use crests and all manner of insignia in place of vehicle registration numbers. Vociferous arguments were tendered in some quarters that the practice was simply cultural. Since when did this culture begin? And who decided it? Go online and check. There are so many pictures, I've done this, so many pictures of official vehicles of paramount chiefs in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even as recently as 90s, with license plates that look like what all other citizens accept and use. So when did it become infra-dig for a chief to have a license plate on a vehicle? What about the total mess that is our land management regime, which implicates so many traditional leaders? Time pressures will not allow us to dwell on this matter much longer. Who cultivates these menacing militias we call land guards? Are there no traditional leaders involved? When even paramount chiefs, who are said to be custodians of respective aspects of civic culture, engage in incendiary public debates that inflame passions and threaten the peace in society, are they not deserving of censure? But who is to do this? Us leaders of the state, ever mindful of votes, simply turn a blind eye to even potentially criminal utterances of ominous threats. No one can impose on the people of Ghana what to do with chieftaincy, certainly not my intention. But some leaders must ring the bell that a conversation must be had to make the reforms that are necessary. Ordinarily, many of these media events we label as national dialogues, national conferences, national summits, and so on, do not impress me. Nonetheless, there is possibly a case to be made for a serious consultative process, one that will have constitutional implications to enable the people to decide what to do with the institution of chieftaincy. A role that is consistent with the ambition to build a thriving constitutional republic, one that flourishes in a true democracy. It seems to me that only the president can lead this, and he must, before all hell breaks loose in this Santa Claus democracy. As I was driving here, I read that Sunyani now has 3 paramount chiefs or something of the sort. This is a real issue. We must not run away from it. Now we go for it. A glance at political parties. Without a coup d'etat, yet another one that is, it is difficult to see how we will exit an essentially multi-party system of government. But our brand of multi-partyism requires radical surgery. My general experience in the last decade and a half of our Fourth Republic is that when supporters of the main political parties are in opposition, they become somewhat supportive of coups. Many become vocal advocates of governance disruption by conspiratorial cliques from the armed forces. Given the services have never staged a coup as an establishment, it is only conspiring cliques that do. Once their parties win power, though, the coup mongers tend to fall silent on their violent criticism of multi-partyism, as though to say, shh, it's our turn to eat. Our mouths are too full to argue. That lack of conviction in a selected system of government is worrying. Santa Claus democracies are attempts at pursuing democracy without true democrats in charge as lead actors. To have experienced the coup in Ghana, you must have been born before December 31st, 1981, which means those below the age of 45 never have. Going by the last census in 2021, this implies 76% of the population have never experienced a coup. It is not much wonder that there's so much renewed romanticism about coups in some inexperienced and impetuous quarters. Not many have actually seen coup regimes devour their own makers and co-conspirators. However bad, degenerate, and renegade a Santa Claus democracy may seem, let us not be misled that relief from its defects can come from coup d'etats, where revolutions are mass-based activities of the people themselves to topple dictatorial oppressive systems. Coups are carried out by a small and opaque band of undisciplined conspirators. These conspirators operate like a secret society of witches, to use Usman Sembene's expression, or a group of political armed robbers, and impose themselves on the people forcibly. It cannot be the route forward that we choose for ourselves in and post-2025. Let me leave no one in any doubt. I am an opponent of every single coup in our political history and will oppose any attempt at one in the future. Yet, democracy must show itself to be responsible and deliver tangible improvements in people's lives. Whatever system of government or governance only delivers mass misery, egregious inequity, extreme poverty, and multiple promises of miracles that lead nowhere will eventually collapse. Intellectual resistance to coups alone cannot stop that. In that regard, political parties themselves, as organizations and as institutional capillaries through which the river of democracy flows, must be examined. Are our dominant political parties, MPP and NDC, in actual reality, true people-based parties, accountable for delivery of improved livelihoods, given that they have all been in power for substantial periods of the Fourth Republic? Why have we not seen more prosperity? Are these parties mere electoral machines, or are they true people-based organizations? The first port of call for this examination is campaign financing. In a reply to my private query on what data the Electoral Commission has on the funding of campaigns by political candidates, my worst fears were confirmed. Quote, the EC has no data on the funding of campaigns by political candidates. This is an area where the EC is incapacitated because the Constitution, political parties law, and the constitutional instruments do not have any provisions in that regard, unquote. I'm quoting a very senior official from the EC. I suspect you can guess why I haven't mentioned the name. As we say in Hausa, Mangana Yamutu. Why neither the NDC nor MPP has frontally confronted this obvious lacuna in the law is a matter we can all speculate on intelligently. What is obvious, though, is that this infernal crater is the root of all evils in a Santa Claus democracy. Without near total transparency of fund flows in politics, any country, any system of government, any political project sets itself up to be captured by a manipulative and privileged few. It is not too difficult to understand why. If it is the last thing we do in this life, we must devote ourselves to cleaning up the space with resolve and conviction. It will not be easy, for corruption and the roots of corruption will fight back resolutely. It is in the nature of that beast. Its purveyors have powerful vested interest in the status quo. Therefore, where citizens are not highly politically conscious, organized, and alert, any leader that takes it on will be toppled. This is one of the reasons why thriving democracies have political parties that focus tremendously on building knowledge through a culture of learning for all members. The PAP in Singapore and the CPC in China are two examples that I have familiarity with. Their party schools and academies are influential and respected. A culture of continuous self-development and improvement is built in members, and leaders exemplify this. The people identify the parties by how they think, what ideas they stand for, how they put those into practice, and so on. We are very far from that. When so many of our political debates are soaked in invective, personal attacks, and all but sober analysis, the parties seem to unleash attack dogs as a counter to reasoned disagreement. Facts and reason are discounted. This is not a moral climate in which any country can thrive. If we continue down this route, a day may come when the minority in parliament and the majority will differ on what time of the day it is. And the Supreme Court will have to intervene because a speaker is thought to be biased in his ruling on what the time is. During presidential transition periods, the civic space seems to go temporarily insane. A high court has once been invaded. So-called foot soldiers have stormed state offices because an elected president's appointee is assessed not to be one of them, whatever that means. Even MPs, the honorables, have come close to all-out physical brawls. On one occasion, it involved the snatching of ballots. This is an explosively dangerous situation. It is sustained training and development that ensure people-based political parties become disciplined organizations. This training and development must be such that it deeply connects, not alienates, members and leaders of the parties to socio-economic realities prevailing in the country. Our political parties, while the funding environments are being cleaned up and the cost of elections drastically reduced, so that the Santa Claus democracy can retire Santa Claus and become a true democracy, must prioritize training and development and continuous learning at all levels, and we must demand it. The first step to totalitarianism, in many cases, has been the cult of personality. And today, our political parties breed this by nurturing pernicious ignorance. The sometimes intemperate rhetoric by leaders, and now some of their lawyers, inflames passions. The tendency to condemn high-handed Gestapo-like raids on homes, only in opposition, but to then do the same when in power sets bad examples. The needlessly adversarial style in Parliament and in our courts that we seem to have adopted wholesale from the British colonial system does not build solidarity across party lines in a country that desperately needs to unite around the big ideas of development. There are many examples of legislatures around the world that have robust debates in Parliament but remain civil. In exasperation, Speaker Alban Bagbin once remarked with thinly veiled scorn, quote, "Some members of the House have referred to me as a headmaster, treating honorable members like students. I reject that assertion. Where there are students, there must be a headmaster. If you don't have a headmaster, you know what is going to happen to the school," unquote. These are far-reaching words, coming on the back of a ministerial vetting process that needlessly inflamed passions and divided the country significantly. Is it worth it if every nominee is anyway routinely going to be passed? Anyone else uttering such words as were spoken by the Speaker would have been hauled somewhere, Parliament, Supreme Court, maybe even the Academy of Arts and Sciences, for contempt. Of what, though, I remain uncertain. It cannot be right that watching parliamentarians in actions make us say in timeless fashion, "Sayo, Onukpa, Bejenlo." But because we have also experienced them reaching quick, amiable consensus in matters like the payment of generous terminal ex gratia awards to themselves, we know they can be exemplary in conduct. Onipa nyabwa, mamonye, dakamuyesh, fantatu kambus, they used to say on the plant. If I do not move on now, we know what my fate will be, contempt. Of what, I do not know. We must clean up our political culture and make it much less divisive. To avoid contempt of something, we touch now on the media and we are done. Sometimes, when one observes the contradictions of Santa Claus democracies, it seems to say to those of us who defend true democracy, in a Cicado Secondi lingo, I say, "Musiso namope heba." The situation with the media. There is enough time only to touch on a few top-line but systemic issues in the media. We cherish media freedom, but that should be accompanied by a distinct sense of responsibility and professionalism. It is with severe concern that we have watched the media environment slide into a realm where profanity and even pornography, a culture of debate marred in personalized abuse and invective, and a general disregard for ethics have grown out of control. What has gone wrong and how can we correct this before we plunge ourselves into a social explosion? The media shapes behavior, for better or for worse. It is a matter of deep concern if it loses its own moral and ethical moorings. There are more than 700 authorized media stations in Ghana today. Bearing in mind that there were no private stations at the start of the Fourth Republic until Charles Reku Brobe Tarzan courageously pried that space open in 1994, this represents explosive growth. With such fragmentation and proliferation, is it a surprise that standards have severely declined? On what transparent basis are licenses issued? Does partisan patronage feature? When you have so many nanostations, not even microstations, nanostations, are they viable at all? How much can they afford to invest in the recruitment, training, and development of their staff? We begin to understand the issue at a systemic level. Part of the reason why this fragmentation exists is that the authoritarian legislation which prevented private stations from gaining national coverage has never been changed. It originated at a time when a quasi-military dictatorship was in place, and it was rightly and roundly criticized by the pro-democracy groups of the day. Yet when these so-called Democrats won power, they too realized that fragmentation is a useful means by which the Santa Claus democracy, by which the powerful in a Santa Claus democracy can control and dominate citizens. So they kept the authoritarian structure intact. Despite the significant advance in technological capability, it is now time to develop a policy framework based on relevant legislation that reverses this hapless situation. Hyperfragmentation has had deleterious consequences on media standards. The media has been hijacked in many places for parochial partisan projects. It is no surprise that the serial caller foot soldier orientation of shouting insults at each other dominates the airwaves. A major consequence of this being that many people who could contribute to serious development discourse are unwilling to show up. The environment is too toxic. The supremacy of science, facts, and truth is routinely undermined. People with integrity and independence are despised. The partisan extremists rule the roost, and the ever-shouting banshees assume thought leadership. Some true patriots, unwilling to get into the gutter of profanity, invective, and abominable conduct, just check out as a result. And then the Santa Claus democracy comes to bear the indelible marks of intolerance and perpetual strife. This entire country is the loser. In this matter, I challenge this academy to emerge at the front row to help the necessary process of restoration of sanity. Where is the regulator in this situation? I am in no doubt that the Supreme Court judgment in the case of independent broadcasters versus the National Media Commission, NMC, rightly or wrongly, dented the NMC's self-confidence. There is an obvious regulatory retreat that has led to the wilderness environment in place now. In an age where the lines distinguishing facts from fiction are so blurred, and fake news looks like real news, because we have the technology to do so, the role of an effective regulator is essential. We may be cynical about what sometimes appears to be the institutional diffidence and bashfulness of the NMC, but it is more productive to argue for the establishment of constitutional clarity and the re-equipping of the NMC with requisite constitutional powers so that it can function as a fair and effective regulator. We do not by this ask for an Orwellian Big Brother or Gestapo, just a fair regulator, one that can bring professional discipline back to the realm. Chair, we are finally at the conclusion. In our time together, I have argued that the only reason why we must want democracy is if it delivers improved livelihoods at scale. This, in my view, must be the pulsating propeller of the craft of people-based development, so that we can secure sustained, inclusive, and human-centered growth. We looked at why it is important to build a competent state, and looked at some changes that can be made to specific features of our national existence, such as the media, political parties, and the institution of chieftaincy. We are unapologetic about our defense of true, underlined, true democracy, and have not retreated from our condemnation of coups d'etat as a serious consideration for development. Chair, we repeat in conclusion that the historical task facing this generation of Ghanaians and Africans is to liberate the productive forces in order to improve livelihoods and move the mass of our compatriots from poverty to prosperity. On this, we are immovable rocks. Nothing else matters if we do not succeed at this historical task. It is my firm conviction that no people can achieve development and prosperity if they do not let go of extreme partisan polarization and unite around big ideas for progress. And to do so, they must build competent governance. 34 million of us with a high-quality GDP of $1 trillion, for example, will feel very different to our current situation. The fourth John Dramani Mahama, has been fortunate to get what many in this life never get, a second chance after 8 years of reflection. We pray he makes the most of it. Good luck, Mr. President. I address him now directly. In a friendly conversation with some African compatriots many years ago, Atewolis, who was a strident and remorseless critic of Nasingbe Eyedema, got us laughing. He argued energetically that many times, calm and seemingly passive, you can never really know what the Ghanaian is planning or thinking. Therefore, you must be careful not to take that calmness for granted. President Mahama, you have known the Ghanaian longer than I have. This story may resonate. It is unnecessary for me to say more. Some of those who wish you well will be your harshest critics. Yet some of your most ardent flatterers will be mere opportunistic leechers. Your ability to see who is genuine and who is not will determine whether or not you succeed. Best wishes. We are the people who, in the face of advice about how to keep reputations intact, sometimes spit out in dismissive tones. At such times, the musician Keke Kabobo would remind us, Yesumpo, Onipa Dasania Bonasendia, no software Okana Semaji collection. Ona Onuwine, singing band need your own chain. When we want to be, and I include myself in that, we can be very cynical and passive-aggressive. Never underestimate the Ghanaian. Mr. President, on a flight from Johannesburg to Accra several years ago, when both of us were incontrovertibly young men, you told me about the desire to see political polarization reduce in Ghana. You have the chance to lead the transformation now in our national political life. Take it while still being strict about enforcing the law. If you do, God bless Ghana, for we will move forward together as a people. To describe that desire, Swahili speakers say tuko pamoja. Nyanja speakers in Southern Africa say tiende pamoja, or that means we are in it together. The Portuguese-speaking freedom fighters in Africa would say, a luta continua. And you, Mr. President, as a younger man, used to say, no ababase. As Ruth First, a martyr of the Southern African liberation struggle, taught us, quote, in the midst of darkness, there's always room for a tiny flicker of hope, unquote. Whatever happens, if we are united as a people around big ideas and a common purpose, and willing to work hard and be creative, we have a chance. It is on that note of hope I wish to end. James Baldwin wrote these immortal words. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and light goes out. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on his experience of Nazi brutality, wrote these moving and uplifting words, quote, we who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. We must choose our own way and base those choices on sound strategic analysis. Thank you. I am done.
So I guess the applause sums it all up. But let's give him another round of applause. I think there are many in this room who must be feeling sorry for me, that how am I going to sum up what he has said? I don't usually do. And oh, of course, there are many people online, so let me also say, I don't know how you will show your appreciation, but I'm sure you will send individual messages to Mr. Nsaku here, who has walked us through the iniquities of inequity in our Santa Claus democracy. And I am interpreting our Santa Claus democracy as Papa Bronya, who brings the goods, as he says, at Christmas time, regular intervals. But what he has done is to walk us through a generalized crisis, which is not just in Ghana. We're living through very tumultuous times. We're facing, in the last 2 months, I've been to many conferences where the term holy crisis has been used several times. There is a crisis of democracy in many places, not just in Africa. There is an economic crisis going on. There are conflicts everywhere, unfolding before us. Now we are worried about how we will bring our compatriots who are in the Middle East home. There's a financial crisis going on, which is affecting us. And there may be an oil crisis on our hands very soon. And especially with the Trump presidency in the US, so many things have been turned upside down, and it is affecting all of us, many of the certainties. So it is not a surprise, the issues that Mr. Nsaku has treated us to. He talked about two countries, the elite versus the rest. I thought he was being overgenerous, where he was talking about the elite in our societies enjoying almost the same indicators as people in OECD countries. Our taps are not even running. The electricity is, inshallah, comes on at best. So we are not even producing for our elite. Where are the hospitals? When our elites are ill, they don't go to hospital here. Where are the healthcare facilities here? So there are really a lot of issues that affect. So yes, our society may be polarized, but it's not perhaps in the same ways that are being suggested. There are certainly a lot of inequities. We're simply not producing enough goods and services for everybody, not even for the elite. We're not producing those goods and services, precisely for the reasons that he advances. Incompetent bureaucracies, lack of planning, lack of political will, and some structural issues that he did not really address. So you can come into power with the strongest will, you can do everything, and yet may not be able to shift very much. I think after the 2020 elections, we were engaged in looking at the party manifestos. And I remember a Ghanaian economist, Dr. Theo Achampong, looking at the manifestos of the two leading parties and saying that even if the two leading parties, even if they achieved everything in their manifesto, very little in Ghana was going to change, because a lot of it was about procurement, etc. And it wasn't going to shift the structural issues. And I think that we need to also focus on those structural issues which ensure, like he says, the political parties come and go. Yes, there are issues about financing, about how they function as democratic parties, etc. But there are some very big issues that we really need to address if we are to escape those things. Maybe he summed it up in the neoliberalism, but it was not broken down. So I was sitting here and thinking about the students in the room, particularly as Mr. Nsaku made all these references. And I thought, if I was a student, when I go back, I'm going to say I'm going to read. I'm going to find out about all the people that he referred to, so that I can also understand the role, because in this lecture he has spoken a lot about the place of ideas, the place of knowledge, and how this shapes development. He's also talked about our increasing religiosity in the face of increasing lawlessness, increasing crime, increasing selfishness, and everything. He referred to the Academy's statement on Galamsey, which, and in the last 3 years, we have taken the leadership on the issue of Galamsey, and our latest press statement on the repeal of LI 2462 highlighted many of these kinds of issues. The distraction, why we can't get water to drink. Even when we do, the quality of the water that we're drinking is suspect. 2 weeks ago, when we had our forum on Galamsey, we were told that, and we saw the pictures, Ghana water, the contamination with heavy metals, we're not managing to get it out of the water that we're drinking. So we face very serious systemic crisis, which apparently our political elites are not able to address. He's raised a number of constitutional issues, and we are going through a constitutional reform process right now. And I know that many people, including himself, have sent memos to the Constitutional Reform Committee. So it is my hope that those issues, I mean, the president himself was saying yesterday that it looks like this is the last time that we are going to appoint MMDCs. That going forward, they are likely to be elected. So there are some issues that we all need to raise our voices about. He's raised the role of the academy, and I can assure him that the academy is very cognizant of its responsibility and have been trying to meet it within its means to point and to raise attention to these kinds of issues. I will not go over the 5 issues that he mentioned, the examples of Singapore and China, issues, are very, very pertinent issue. There's the slide from professionalism, not just in the media, right across our whole society. And the fact that democracy should lead to improvements in the lives of the people. This past weekend, I was in a meeting, and precisely this issue of this romance of coup d'etats and extra constitutional change of transfers of power, and especially the fact that not only our young people, even some older people, the Afrobarometer surveys are showing very disturbing trends. And Professor Jimabwedi, who is a fellow of this academy, did a brilliant job of showing that even on the statistics, that democracy delivers better than military rule. That despite the claims, no military dispensation has delivered the goods that it has claimed to take power for. Normally it's about, corruption, security, etc. But using very established parameters, it was clear that the dividends may be slow, they may not be in the trillions that we're talking about, they may not be fairly distributed. But if you do a dispassionate analysis that these are imperfect democracies, are delivering more democratic dividends, especially if you discount the trolls and all the wonderful things that are happening in our sub-region, which the Media Foundation for West Africa's fact checker re-informed us that 80% of the claims were not really true. But it means that we need to do more, we need to do better. And I think that he's touched on some areas, a lot of areas, and they need to move away from this ideological fixation on the role of the private sector and to begin to think more broadly. Also, how to capacitate our state so that it can do its catalytic work. I said a number of things about traditional leaders that I shall not continue, and raise the issue of our political culture, because I think that the political parties really are a reflection of the political culture and not the political parties creating that political culture. And of course, the role of the media, the lack of professionalism, the fact that the same tendencies, the same people who control the politics increasingly also control the media, and it accounts for the lack of professionalism and the slide in standards. I mean, trying to watch TV, Ghanaian TV, the different channels, is a pain, you know. It's really a pain, and you do not, there's no variety, there is very little analysis. And yet they are brilliant journalists, they are brilliant media practitioners. How come we are being offered such a poor sampling when we turn on our TVs? So there's a lot of hope, and as I have said, back to our students, I think that we really need to read. I was impressed that Yah was referring to so many of my friends in his speech, people that I have grown up with, people who are responsible for me staying in Ghana and not going anywhere. The Mamdanis, the Claudakis, the Mkadawiris, these are all my friends. And they come from an intellectual tradition, which is not too far from what also happens here in our academy. So what I want to implore you is that when you hear that the academy is giving a lecture, do come and listen to us. We give space to a variety of people, a variety of opinions, and always a lot of knowledge, like you have been treated to this evening. Thank you very much once again. Thank you.